You come to me when I'm lonely. I take your hand and we go home.
Kim, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I
So,
am too. I am too. I ask everyone when they come in. The first question I love to ask was that if did you grow up in a household or a family that believed in ghosts and spirits, and did you grow up in a family that had a tradition of telling ghost stories?
well, disappointingly, no, because we didn't tell ghost stories, but I did grow up in a family that did believe in ghosts. And I do believe, like my father, although would never have admitted this, he was incredibly psychic, and he had great insight into things before they happened, which was all just part of growing up. And it wasn't weird because it was just how it was. And I have two brothers. I'm the middle child, one either side, and both of those were incredibly psychic, which I didn't again realize at the time. But we all seem to have had a gift. Not so much my mum. My mum was sort of very, I suppose, down to earth and pragmatic in many things. But myself, my father, my brothers, yeah, we definitely did have insight into something else that was unexplainable.
Were your psychic abilities and the sensitive abilities of your brothers, was that something that was encouraged, or was it just something that just was and it was unspoken?
It just was, and it wasn't encouraged nor discouraged. It was like that's who we were. From a very, very young age, I had night terrors, and I was sleepwalking from almost from when I had my own bedroom, from about the age of 2. I don't remember. Um, and I can remember having really vivid things happening to me, and or hearing things and feeling things. It was always about me losing something. Even as a young child, it was about me losing something and the panic of not being able to find something. And as I got older, it always became about keys. And I'd lose a key. I was locked in, or I was locked out, or I'd lock someone in, or I'd lock someone out. These keys, I mean, I would wake up in a sweat of terror, where these keys became so important that I truly believed when I woke up in the morning that I'd thrown the car keys away or the house keys away, or so, and I never had. Some years later, when I was running workshops, I was working with a psychiatrist called Dr. Brenda Davis. She was a real psychiatrist, a qualified psychiatrist, but she was a spiritual psychiatrist. And we were doing a workshop about regression. And I was the facilitator of the workshop and sitting next to her. And she started to talk about what was going to happen later that day when she was going to start regressing the group. So as she was talking, something happened to me where I started to go back in time. And I'm saying to her, Brenda, stop talking, something's happening to me. And I completely, almost sort of lost control of my senses. And she said, no, go with it, Kim. Keep going with it. Where are you? And in England, there's a name of a Victorian prison that was used for people with mega mental issues. I can't even remember the name of it now, but suddenly I was there in this prison as a prison warder. As a woman, had a black dress on with a tight waist and a big skirt, and around my waist was a belt with a massive bunch of keys. And I can remember hearing people screaming and shouting, and the noise was just phenomenal. And I'm speaking this as I'm seeing it and as I'm living it. And I left the prison and I came out to this space. So there was a river, and I got the keys and I threw the keys in the river and sat down and literally started to pull the hair out of my head like a madwoman. And then she said to me, and what happened next? And I said to her, I'm walking. She said, where are you going? And I went into the woods, and I hung myself. And as I said to her, I hung myself, my nose literally started to pour with blood. And people were like rushing and getting tissues and pushing them at me and saying, "Are you all right?" And I just felt exhausted. And my nose didn't stop bleeding for about an hour. It was just going and going and going. And I thought, God, I just don't know where that came from. I never had the dream about keys again after that. And it was the keys to the cells in this prison where I'd left people locked in these cells. Maybe it wasn't the only bunch of keys, I don't know. But through this regression, it's like it just cleared something from a past life. So as much as, we talk about ghost stories, is when we have real life situations, I wonder how many are attached to past life situations.
Wow. That's an incredible story. That is an incredible, incredible story. So, Kim, would you say that you grew up in a haunted house?
I didn't grow up in a haunted house, but I did live in a haunted house. And back in the early 90s, I was living in London, and my husband and I had an apartment, and I had a young baby. We were on the third floor, and we were desperate to move into a house. And it was a time here in the UK where, as a sale board went up, it was sold. You had to be so quick to move. And a house came up for sale very nearby to where we were living, perfect location. Didn't particularly like the house, but was so desperate to get in a house, we put in an offer which was accepted. And just before we were due to exchange our contracts, I just had a really bad feeling about it. And I went in to see the estate agents, and I said, I don't want to go ahead with this. And they said, no, if you don't go ahead with it, you're not going to move. You could be stuck there for, in your flat for years. So we did. And we moved into this house, and it was called The Glen. And it was in this cul-de-sac. It was a very strange house. It was a three-story house, and the bedrooms are on the top floor. And there was one room which actually was my son's bedroom that was always cold. It didn't matter. You could touch the heating, the radiator, it'd be boiling hot, but the room was ice cold. And there was just always this sort of weird feeling in his room in particular. I mean, on hindsight now, I should have moved him out the room. But anyway, but I can remember he was just about walking then and talking and going into his room and seeing him standing up in his cot, pointing and laughing at something. And I would pull into my psyche, and I could see a little girl with a teddy bear like running around the room, and I could see her and he could see her, and it was all quite innocent. There was nothing, it wasn't threatening, it wasn't anything horrible. And then sometimes we would see orbs bouncing off the room, and even my husband, who doesn't really believe in anything outside of the norm, said, there's something going on in this room. Martin and I, my husband and I, went out one night, and his mother came to babysit, and she was in Alexander, my son's room, changing his nappy, his diaper. And when we got in, she went, "Kim, you have to move out of this house." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because I was changing Alexander's bottom," she said, "and I saw someone standing by the door." And I said, "Okay, I know there's somebody here, but it's not sinister, it's not dark." But then it started to get that way, where I'd take my son into the room and he would scream, and I'd take him out the room and he would stop. So we obviously had to take him out the room. And just like a real ghost story, I had a rocking chair in the room. And one day I went in there on my own, and the chair moved. It just very subtly just moved like this. And we were terrified. Honestly, almost in the middle of the night, we jumped in the car and we drove to one of our parents' house and said, like, it was just too spooky. At that time, I knew a lady who was a very well-known psychic in the area. She'd been running circles for donkey's years, and I'd spoken to her about it. And she said to me, "Kim, you have to go back to the house because you've got to clear it. Don't take your son with you." leave your husband and your son wherever they are. You have to go back alone. This is your job. So I went back to the house, went into the room, and the temperature dropped. Like as I walked through the room, it dropped to freezing. Like it was just so cold. And I can remember sitting on the floor with my back to the radiator, which was very hot. And I can remember shivering with the cold. And this lady was on the phone and she said, I'm going to tell you what to do. Call the spirit. And I went, no. And she went, call the spirit, Kim. And I went, I can't. I was so terrified. And she said to me, pull yourself together, call the spirit, let's get him here. And just as she said that, in this rocking chair, from my third eye, I saw a man sitting in an army uniform, all ripped and ragged. And the chair literally started to move. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And she's saying to me on the phone, pull yourself together. Do not show weakness. Ask him what he wants. Ask him why he's here. So it turns out, so I said to this man, why are you here? So the house was on a ley line, which I didn't know when we bought it. And it was on the cross of a ley line, a very powerful point of spiritual stuff and movement and ghosts, etc. And he told me that he was from World War One, that he was a major, and that he had led his battalion into battle, knowing that they were all going to die, and one by one watched them as they were gunned down. And he said to me, I can't go over, he said, because his guilt was just beyond anything that he could deal with. So he had been floating around the earth plane for decades, and she was guiding me, and she said, tell him he has to go to the light, bring in the light. And I could see him as clear as day. And I'd started to calm down now. The fear had sort of left me. I'm not going to say I was comfortable with it, but the fear had sort of left me as we began to talk. And then suddenly I got a feeling of his mother. And I said to him, your mum is here. She's come to get you. And he wouldn't go. And almost, I mean, you can think I'm mad actually, but almost from nowhere, I saw this hand come out from the middle of the room to take his hand and pulled him up. And he went, and within seconds, the heat in the room just came to normal like the rest of the house. And so the psychic lady said to me, so now we have to lock the house down. We have to psychically protect the house. And so she taught me or showed me or guided me into how to bring a pyramid of light around the house, to lock it into the earth, to check it, to make sure there were no holes in this vortex of light that we had brought down. And that was it. And then, the whole energy of the house changed, but we did put it on the market and sell it because I couldn't cope with it. It was like it just left a really uneasy taste, particularly with a small child in the house. And that's what we did. We sold the house and moved on.
Wow. Have you ever been back past the house since you moved?
Yeah, I have. A few years back, I drove past the house, and what was odd, that all the other houses had work done. There'd been, new windows and doors, and this house was exactly as we'd left it. And that was, 20 odd years ago, and they hadn't spent a penny on it. But it was also the one house in the Glen, which was the name of the cul-de-sac, that was, no one ever lived there for more than 2 years. And it was like this constant turnover of people buying the house and moving the house and not understanding or realizing why. But it was a very unlucky house. It was a house full of very, it was a house, not sadness for us as a family, but you could just feel there was just something. You didn't feel like home when you walked through the door. And the years that we lived there, I never walked through that door and thought, oh, it's nice to be home. And sometimes I used to think, I don't even want to go through the door, and didn't really understand why.
Isn't that interesting? Isn't it? Because I think it can be hard sometimes to differentiate between yourself and a place that you're living in, right?
Yes.
And I think some people are kind of haunted in and of themselves. Like my guess would be that some people, it's people who are haunted, and other times it's definitely a place that is haunted. And
Yeah.
how do you tell? How does someone differentiate? Is it me or is it me or is it you,
Yeah.
house? Um,
Exactly. But I think
right.
also when you start to see your behavior change in certain places, it's like I'm always like this when I'm there, but I'm always like this when I'm over there. And it's, I think sometimes things need a little bit of investigation.
It's interesting. So, because just the same way that different people will make you feel or even make you act in certain ways, right? When you're sharing energy
Mhm.
with any person, then that same thing would hold true for spaces, places, homes, right?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I know
So
also because, my other hat is that I am a feng shui consultant. I qualified back in the 90s. And the amount of houses that I've walked in and can instantly feel that energy. Like I can feel if it's a nice home, I can feel if it's a friendly home, and I can feel that if there's a dark energy in the home. And although that's not part of that job, for me to do that, like in myself, I think, well, I can see why you're having issues because there's something here that's greater. But not everybody wants to hear that. Not everybody wants to hear, that you might have a ghost in the attic. It's like they just, nah, don't want to know that. Don't want to know it.
and I certainly sometimes, living with something spooky, ignorance can be your best friend,
Mm.
so that's certainly a very human response. Um, these are such interesting stories that you're telling. I'd love to ask you what's the scariest experience that's ever happened to you. But what you've already shared is so harrowing. Do you have?
Well, there's another one. Funny enough, there is another one. Because I was thinking, when you invited me on, I was thinking, oh, scary stories. And then suddenly they all started flooding back from the past. But many years ago, my husband and I went to a place called Jersey. It's a Channel island off the English coast, and it's between France and England. And there's not much happens there. It's got nice beaches and good restaurants, and there's not much else there. But there is a big history there, and the history is that during World War II, that the Germans invaded Jersey and took it over. Well, it is quite a boring place. Forgive me if anyone lives in Jersey, off the coast of England. Um, but so we did some tours while we were there. There's sort of certain things to see, and one of the things that we went to see was the Jersey War tunnels, which are also known as the German Underground Hospital. And we just did it as something to do for a few hours one afternoon. But I had a bit of a strange feeling about this place. I didn't know anything about it. It was, we got on the coach and the tour guide took us to this place and people got off. And as I got off the coach, a voice in my head said, "Don't go in." And I thought, oh God, well, we paid now. My husband's not going to be very happy with me. It's like we just come all this way, and I ignored it. So it's a very eerie place, and it's very barren. Although Jersey is a beautiful island, this actual place where the war tunnels are is very well. It was very barren. There was nothing there. There was no real trees or flowers. It was just a big space. So you go into the entrance of this place, you go down into the tunnels, and it was a hospital, which I then found out through the tour guide, that was used by the Nazis, by the Germans in the war, and some of the rooms were used for human experiments. Anyway, I walked in there, my heart was beating. The smell of the damp, and it was just horrible. It was so wicked down there. There was just something so horrible about this whole place. So we walked through these, people dispersed to go and explore on their own. And I walked down this corridor, and on the sides there were theatres that were set up exactly as they were set up during that time. And as I turned my head, looked into this room, I saw this man, a ghost, dressed as a doctor with instruments in his hand, and he turned and he looked at me, and we literally locked eyes for about 5 seconds. I swear to God, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. It was so horrible. And I said to Martin, my husband, I said, we've got to get out of here, Martin. We've got to leave. I can't be here. And I think as a sensitive, and that's why the voice in my head said, you're not to go in, do not go in, as a sensitive was picking up all of this stuff. Well, we got back on this coach and waited for everyone else to get back on, and everyone was talking about the experience, very animated, and I just thought that was just the most horrible thing, the most frightening thing that I've ever experienced in my life. When I got back to England, I used to run my own circle, a psychic circle. And I said to my group, like, we're going to go into the tunnel. We're going to just take ourselves there. We're going to put some light in there, going to see if we can shift this energy that's been sitting stagnant for all of these decades. So I opened the circle, bring in the protection, did everything that, we normally do. And I was talking people through the circle. I said, right, we're just going into the entrance of the tunnel. And the people in my group went, we can't go in there, Kim. And I hadn't even told them. I just told them that I had a negative experience. We needed to go in there. And the message was so strong, leave it alone. Do not interfere with this place. Because I do believe that there are places that have so much evil that it doesn't matter how much good, how much light, how much love, how much healing that you do on it, it cannot be fixed. And I suppose that's yin and yang, and it's dark and light, and it's shadow work and all the rest of it. And I think that there are some places that just are. They're just rotten to the core, that we're not supposed to interfere with. And really, for this little island, it was like a commercial venture now. It was a way of getting the tourists to go and spend some money and, just see this place. But, I can still see when I was thinking about this story the other day, preparing to talk to you, Sasha, I can still see this man as clear as day. And I know he's still there. I know he's still wandering those corridors. I know he's still there. And that's where he will be, probably for eternity.
I'm so sorry you had to share space with someone like that.
Well,
That's like looking into the face of pure evil, it sounds like.
yeah, I believe it was. I really do believe it was. But again, it's one of those things. It did it. I thought about it for quite a long time. It was frustration as well of not being able to do anything and to help to even put some light into that place. The place didn't want light. It did not want it. And it just, as we tried to push the light in, the light was pushed back. And that's when we just stopped the circle and said, no, we're not to go there. We're not to venture there.
Wow. Amazing and scary. And the implications of that, the implications of places that are that thick and that weighted. And it makes me even curious that talking about yin and yang, if kind of the world, the dichotomy of the physical world that we live in, that we inhabit, are anchored by those things. And I wonder I wonder what would be strong enough to dissipate that, right? Would the entire island have to be
I
destroyed?
don't. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it was something that I'd only ever experienced once in my life. Something that was that dark. I'd never experienced it since, and I hadn't experienced it before. And I don't want to experience it again, because it was something. And I think that, for anyone that's listening, when your intuition tells you something, be guided by it, because it's there for a reason. But I do believe that I had to see that. I do believe I had to experience that. And I think, when we work in a world of, trying to work with the light all the time and work with the good, that sometimes we have to see that side of it, just to be reminded that there's a very fine line between the light and the dark.
Yes. Oh, wow. So do you feel like you're someone who takes your work home with you, or is it easy for you to erect boundaries when you're doing energy work, and what does that feel like for you?
I think I can put boundaries up. I mean, there is no doubt about that, and but that's come with experience and over time. That wasn't always the case, and I think that when I first started to become serious about, the line of work that I went into, you have to, because I think you would go mad otherwise. And, it's no different to doing a reading for a client that's having a really distressing situation. And I can remember years ago, a client might tell me something so horrible, and I'd lay in bed at night thinking that poor lady or, that poor man, what's going on? But you can't, because you can't absorb everybody's issues. So I think that, again, with experience, you learn to just detach and just crack on with your own life, but still be mindful of what's going on.
Hmm. And do you think in that way that I think you said there was there was a reason that you saw that figure.
Mm.
What do you think that reason was?
Because I think that, you often hear that saying of love and light, and when you work on our level, that's what it's mostly about. And I think that it's not that we forget, it's that I think we need to be reminded that, again, that this stuff exists. It exists in the dark and it exists in the light. And I think sometimes we just need that short, sharp shock to just say, well, carry on doing what you're doing, because you're doing it well and you're doing it the best you can. But there's still that thing over here, and to me also, it's sometimes when meeting people where, I always wonder when you meet someone and think, I don't like that person. They've done nothing to you. They've said nothing to you. There is nothing that's given them any reason to dislike them, but you just do. And I often think, well, what's that all about? Why don't I like that person? What is it about them? And, and I think, sorry, getting back to the question, that the difference between working, why did I see that situation? I think I just had to be reminded that, this exists and it's not all love and light. We can do our bit, but, there is another side and another energy to all this. And we have to be so careful when we work with spirit work, because we don't know what we're conjuring up. We don't know what we're disturbing. And to be respectful of spirit, spirit, and maybe you get this also, Sasha, when people come for a reading, they might say, have you got my mum there from the spirit world? And I go, well, it doesn't really work like that. It's like, I can't just say, oh, hold on a minute, I'll just grab her, see if she's there. It's like, if they want to make contact, they will, and they'll do it very subtly and very beautifully. Usually that's how it happens. But we have to remember that there is this dark side, and the minute we as vessels of working with spirit open up, that we can be open to anything. We can be open to darkness as well as light, even though, we're not interested in that side. We're only interested in the good.
Yes. And so it's interesting. So it's once you see something that you can't unsee, you'll also recognize it should you
Yeah.
ever come across it again. And so then it becomes very much not, while it wasn't a comfortable thing to experience, it's
Mm.
something that becomes a safeguard for you in the
Yeah.
future,
Yeah.
which
And,
is
I, and
very
I'm
interesting.
I'm sure there's people listening that maybe have experienced a psychic attack. I've experienced two in my life, and they were both very traumatic. And the one that I had, was a few years ago now, and I woke up and I was aware of this lady standing by the bed. And this sounds ridiculous, but she was a lady who worked in a shop nearby to where I lived. I didn't know this lady, just recognized her. And I can remember opening my eyes. My husband was asleep next to me, and I can remember saying in my head, "Why are you here?" And as I said that, she fell into me and literally pinned me down, and I couldn't move a muscle in my body. And I was like this, just trying to get her off. And I called in the angels, and called in my guides. Nothing happened. I was still paralyzed to the space, to my bed. And even though, like, I have real issues with the church and all of this stuff, that's another story. But I started to say the Lord's Prayer. And as I started to say it, this entity moved off of me. And, I slept for weeks after that with the hall light on because I was too frightened to turn the light off. But a friend of mine who was a very renowned psychic, not the same lady as who did the house clearing with me. And I said to her, do you know what's really odd? That it was the lady from the shop down the road who works on the till. I don't know why it was her. And she said, do you know why, Kim? Because a psychic attack often catches you off guard. So the minute you questioned, why are you here? She said it was that split second that the attack happened. She said if it had been someone that you knew, you would have asked a different question or you would have reacted differently. She said it could have been anyone. And so a psychic attack is a horrible thing. I've had two in my life and they were both horrible.
Oh, I want to hear if you'll share those. I would love to hear about them. Would you explain though first, define for people listening, what is the intention of a psychic attack, or what exactly? How would you define a psychic attack?
So, well, I think they're different for different people. For me, often they happen in the night when you're at your most vulnerable, or you're in that sleepy, dozy state. Your body's completely relaxed, and so that you are open to that. Now, this particular psychic attack happened 2 weeks before I opened my first New Age shop. So I was right in the throes of putting stuff on the shelves, my tarot cards, my books, the crystals, everything was being put together to open the shop. And that's when that psychic attack happened. And I do believe that it was like a force that didn't want me to open that shop. And, there's a big story of what happened after that, but which is way too long to tell you. But that was, and she said, they're trying to stop you, Kim, because they know that this shop is going to be a force for good, and they don't want you to do that. And then the second psychic attack happened a few years later, and something else happened at that time where the roof of the shop literally fell in while I was in there. And the night before, I'd had a psychic attack. But that psychic attack it was almost like a warning. I was feeling incredibly vulnerable, like there was stuff going on psychically, and I had a similar experience where I was pinned to the bed and couldn't move, but I knew this time how to move the energy, how to shift it. And then that very weekend, we had a heavy rainfall, and my shop had a flat roof. It was like a standalone shop. And I was in the shop, the roof came in, the whole lot came down. While I was in there, the fire brigade were called, all this stuff happened. And it was around the same time. So I believe that something nasty had got close to me then. And it was probably just, working wholly in the energy of doing psychic work.
Wow. So interesting too, because you are such you're a community builder. You build stores, you build shops, you build tarot decks, you build books. You really, someone who does work with the invisible world, with the paranormal. You bring a lot of physicality, pentacles, if you will, right? What we call in the tarot world. So it makes sense that you would be a target for those things which don't want to be moved out of that space, right? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
so,
But,
so you said you
Sarah,
had
yeah, so I was a target physically from the church and a target psychically from whatever was going on at that time. Because the attacks, the second attack, as I said, it was almost the same as the first, except that I didn't get that minute warning or that 30-second warning that something was going to happen. But the interesting thing was that all day I felt very uneasy. and for no reason. Sometimes you get that feeling like something horrible is going to happen and you can't sort of put your finger on it, but everything around you seems very settled and very okay and very normal. And that psychic attack happened that night, just before the shop. That business literally went under, went under a load of water, and it was devastating. And I think then what happened after that is that I walked away from all of the work for a while, maybe 6 months, maybe close to a year. I just felt like I just needed to breathe. I needed to step away from it because it was all very intense. And it was, the physical attacks as well from the church and everything else. It was like I just had it up to here. It was like I can't even do my work because there's a pastor sticking his nose up at me and it's trying to stop me do what I'm doing. So it's been a fight on the spirit world and on the physical world as well.
Do you feel like things are easier for you now in 2024, that things have eased up a bit on you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think, the Tarot Conference celebrated 20 years this year. And I think that when I first started the Tarot Conference, people were still a little bit wary of talking about tarot. If you were a tarot reader, you found your group, but you didn't really discuss it with all and sundry. And now, nobody cares now. It's fine. We can talk about tarot freely and easily and be proud of what we do. And that's the
Mhm.
difference. So, yeah, definitely, these 2023, 2024 has been wonderful for that. I think we've all been accepted.
I think that, and I think that that's true for so many things, not just tarot. I
Mhm.
remember my first book came out in 2011, and even back in 2011, you couldn't walk into any bookstore and find tarot decks on the shelves,
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah. So I mean, talk about the evolution of consciousness and the
Mm,
evolution of just awareness and acceptance. I think that people tend to have a grim look at the world, and understandably so when you look at the news and
mm,
everything that's going on all at once. But I think that there's been a lot of expansion of consciousness, which is a good thing.
absolutely. Yeah.
Gives me great hope. Great hope. Um, did you have any other spooky stories you'd like to share?
I think I'm done with it with spooky stories. I think, yeah, they're the big ones. They're the big ones. The other ones are just run of the mill. They're not
I
so
was gonna say,
exciting.
I think I need a shot of whiskey after these stories. I mean, they're so intense. So I'd love to ask you, sort of as a final question, I suppose. Um, you know, all of the experiences that you've had, what is your inclination of where we were before we were born, and what is your hunch on what happens to us after we pass
Mm.
out of this life? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a big question. Where do we go? Well, I know that that there is an option of reincarnation. I know that because I've experienced past lives. See, I think it's a hard question, Sasha. But I think that when we die, our soul fragments. I think our soul goes on. I don't think our soul comes back wholly as us. And the reason for that is, when you get people in the world like Hitler, Stalin, these people that were so wicked, like how can they come back as a full being, um, with the soul that they had? So I think, I don't know if I believe this, but I think I believe this, that the soul fragments and part of you comes back and part of you is there as a new person or a new being. Where do we go before this? Well, I'm not really sure, but the only thing I do know is that I do with my group sometimes. We do a meditation, and we do a meditation where we go through the chakra colors, and then we go to the color black. But it's not a black that's frightening. It's a black, behind your eyes you see the black. It's a comforting black, um, that you find yourself in your mother's womb. And it is a womb of darkness, but a beating heart. And it is this heart that is full of love, full of joy, full of excitement, full of hope, I suppose. And then from that black, we then go back one more, like, where are you now? And that's where the stories start to build up with what the different people in the group experience from going back out the other side. And some people, and again, this I can only share what I've experienced through my groups. And it's a lovely meditation because it takes ages and you're really in a deep, deep state of being. And then so you go from the black, you go from the mum's womb, you go back one more. And some people find themselves in a place of, not in a physical place, but in a state almost like being hovering on the ether, but a place of beauty, a place of peace and quiet, and almost like, I suppose, like heaven, literally. And then some people find themselves actually tripped into a life from before. So it's different things from different people. So I'm going to be open to all that. I like to think that, when we come into this world, when a newborn baby comes into this world, that they've had a lovely journey to get there. And, that it's been, that they are on a journey of hope, a bit like the Fool in tarot, that they're on a journey of hope to start their journey through the 78 cards and all that they bring with them.
Love that. Kim, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and I cannot thank you enough for sharing yourself, your stories, your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Sasha. It's been such a pleasure. It's been such a pleasure to talk about this stuff because it's been well locked away for so long. All these stories they're in my head and they're in my life, and I've never shared them before. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for trusting us in this space with sharing this stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being part of Ghost Stories by the Fire. Do you have a spooky story, near-death experience, or supernatural happening you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it. Submit your story to sashagraham.com with Ghost Stories by the Fire in the subject line. You might just wind up on this podcast. And if you want to support it and keep the ghost stories coming, head on over to sashagraham.com to check out my books and tarot decks, which are available for purchase at your favorite bookseller. The Ghost Stories by the Fire theme song is titled Lovely, from the original motion picture score of The Deeper You Dig, a film about the lengths a mother will go to find her daughter's killer. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, I'm saving you a seat at the fire.